This is Audible.
About the author. Garth Marenghi was born in the past, graduated from his local comprehensive, now bulldozed, with some O-levels in subjects. He taught for 9 years at his local library reading group before becoming a full-time horror writer. He has published numerous novels of terror, too numerous to list, nay count, over 500 short stories, and has edited 30 anthologies of his own work, which have all received the Grand Master of Darkdom Award. He wrote, directed and starred in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place for the Peruvian market, which subsequently aired on Channel 4 and has not been repeated due to its radical and polemic content. He commenced work on TerrorTome during the late 1980s, continued on it alone and unaided by editors throughout the 1990s and on into the early 2000s, then the mid-2000s, and has only now found a publisher brave enough to unleash its chilling portendings. He is an honorary fellow. Garth Marenghi's TerrorTome. Contents. Introduction. You don't need to hear this. No. Map. I'm not reading a map. I might describe the map. I don't know. Fine. Introduction. The end times. They're here, Pilgrim. Look around you. Whoa, easy, big guy or girl. Just a peek, or you'll go crazy. Only take it from me. They're here. I'm Garth Marenghi, cosmic veil render, twixt-dimensional visionary, and former Grand Duke of Darkness, now Archduke. As I write this, sweating and fever-addled in my pleather sickbed, laid low by a lethal virus I foresaw and would have foretold if I'd had a publishing deal at the time, more on that anon, I can't help but note with sombre irkdom that my lifelong gift for presagement has been summarily spurned by an ungrateful species soon to reap its own sorry whirlwind. Unchecked despotisms, spiralling virtuality, new pestilence like this one I'm sweating from, the netherweb, thrashionalism, fearache, paranoiativity, you name it. All of it's happened on my writer's watch. Footnote. Figurative authorial responsibility, i.e. not a mechanical device. I defy time on ideological grounds. So where the hell have I been? The short answer is writing the longest and most terrifying epic fictive of my career, 3 installments of which you currently hold in your mortal hand or hands. I'm aware this sentence won't make sense for the audiobook version, but that's your fault for reading me on the go, and no doubt wishing this was a podcast instead, which incidentally isn't an art form. The long answer is the same as above, only with extraneous detail added, which I have omitted. I began writing TerrorTome in the late 1980s, continued throughout the 1990s, and carried on deep into the early and mid-2000s. My grim vision of a world in which a horror writer's imagination literally leaks out of his head to wage supernatural war against unsuspecting mankind was not just wildly visionary for the time, but is now judderingly prescient. Who knew then that a reality would soon be upon us, in which every crazy thought or theory dreamed up by untold doomscribes, them, would possess enough potency and power in the minds of the terrified masses, you, to emerge breathing and seething as grim, hard fact. It. Sure, it was a simpler world back then, but the seeds of doom were already sown. By decade's end, I'd lost my publishing contract, having assaulted my then-editor with his company pager, my closest friends, who were actually, it turns out, all arseholes, the love of my own wife and daughters, possibly partly my fault, a significant proportion of my sanity, nothing remotely sexual, all hope in a brighter future, and, perhaps worst of all, my beloved Jensen Interceptor, impounded on the streets of Hemel Hempstead following a viewing of several one-bedroom apartments that ultimately were too expensive. In my youth, though technically late middle age, I ventured forth into the darkness on a personal odyssey of pain, to bring forth from the hell of my own brain a book of darkdom befitting this age of ruin. Listen with extreme caution to the TerrorTome. Garth Marenghi, Cosmic Veil Render, Twixt-Dimensional Visionary and former Grand Duke of Darkness, now Archduke. Typeface, Dark Lord of the Prolix. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. The Bumper Book of Quotations, page 319. Chapter 1. So it did exist. I stood alone in the pouring rain, peering in through the window of Uniquity's Ink plus Eels, at a machine supposedly invented by Christopher Latham Scholes in 1867, but constructed, according to the price tag slung from its golden carriage return lever, by a Chinese magician in the latter half of the Tang dynasty. I smiled, shaking my head, a bold claim, yet true, for my own research had revealed that Eastern antiquity had achieved, in its long-lost past, a level of technological advancement surpassing even Curry's. Yes, the Chinese had invented paper, and thank the Lord gunpowder, but finally, here was proof beyond all doubt that those ancient sorcerers had also created the humble typewriter. I turned my face from the glass display and looked around me. This lonely side street off Stalkford's town centre, which I'd never noticed before today, seemed to be perpetually empty. Maybe a small second-hand shop specialising in offbeat mysterious oddities didn't attract major footfall. That or the eels were an issue. Nick Steen's the name. Perhaps you've heard of me. Yeah, that's right, the horror guy. The insanely rich, multiple best-selling, dark and dangerous-to-know paperback visionary of the dark arts. That Nick Steen. If not, you soon will. In fact, you do now. But maybe not in quite the way you imagine. An apposite word, that, imagine. And not just because words, like apposite, are my trade or profession. For imagination, which is the root noun of that previous word, imagine, has everything to do with the real-life horrors that were about to unfold. Imagination. My imagination. Let me explicate. In my own time. I turned down the collar of my charcoal tweed blazer over my black polo neck sweater, smoothed back my full and flowing mane of smoky topaz hair, then removed the buff-tinted shades of my chopper pilot days to get a better look. To the casual observer, the typewriter sitting in the shop window before me resembled a conventional model. Aside from its gold-plated exterior, the only difference appeared to be a set of extra keys surrounding the conventional QWERTYs, depicting obscure, archaic letterings and bizarre runic symbols. These stood out, I noticed, at insane psychogeometric angles only Carl Sagan and myself could have perceived. But if the rumours I'd heard were true, and this was the very typewriter I was seeking, then this bizarre, ancient contraption also possessed certain unique powers entirely its own. For, by some unknown spiritual process long since lost to man, this machine's original creator had supposedly instilled in it the ability to commune psychically with its owner, allowing him or her, but mainly him, access to hitherto unreachable depths of the subconscious mind, freeing from the murky swamps of their internal id the darkest parts of their suppressed imagination. As a best-selling horror writer, I had to have it. Also, there was currently 30% off. Although I was still the hot news in horror, crafting non-stop the darkest, most terrifying novels of supernatural terror known to civilization, sizzling on the publishing plate for nigh on 20 years and counting, it wasn't enough. I had too many ideas, too many tales untold, too much darkness left untapped. If I was lucky, I had around 40 years of life left, 50 if I gave up red meat, which wasn't an option. And yet I hadn't even begun to explore the true horrors of human existence, hadn't got anywhere near probing the deeper darkness that exists beneath mankind's basest nature, hadn't yet drawn upon the horror beyond horror, shall we say, that snarling predatory hell beast lying dormant in our supposedly civilized minds, If I could unleash that, thereby teaching mankind, or ladykind if that's important to you, to live alongside their own particular corresponding hellbeast, then just maybe I could save all of us from ultimate self-destruction, endarken our world for the greater bad, and make more money. Which is why I was here now, staring at this damn typewriter.
Buy me.
I jumped at the sudden sound and looked around me, wondering if the owner had leaned briefly out of his shop doorway. But there was no one there. The street, too, was still completely deserted. Then who'd spoken?
Buy me.
There it was again, coming from somewhere close by, it seemed, yet also immeasurable distances away. A deep voice, devoid of expression, yet possessing an undeniable tone of command.
I said buy me.
Again. Was it originating from somewhere in my own head, perhaps? Was I, after 20 solid years at the top of my game, crafting inimitable works of challenging visionary horror, in fact, going mad? I looked down at the typewriter again. If I hadn't known better, I'd assume it had shifted forward slightly on its mock velvet display, moving closer to the glass pane separating us.
Buy me.
In an effort to get away from the strange voice in my head, I made my way over to the door and stepped inside. The interior of the shop was dark and gloomy. An old man in a grubby rubber apron stood behind a dusty counter on the far side of the room. He looked familiar.
Eel?
He asked me, offering up a lidless plastic container clutched in his hand. I walked towards him and glanced inside it. It was an old ice cream box half filled with dirty water, with a writhing cluster of black, slimy snakefish wriggling within. I looked back up and stared deeply into his cataract-covered eyes. I know you from somewhere, old-timer.
I'm Moses Unique,
he rasped, chewing on an eel's head.
I sell uniquities.
He let the eel slide inside him, swallowing the creature whole.
Plus eels.
I'm interested in that typewriter you have on display in your front window.
This one?
He replied, lifting up a large tea cosy on the counter to reveal an identical-looking machine immediately below it. So they're a pair, are they? I asked.
A pair?
He echoed, confused.
This is the only machine of its kind in existence.
I glanced back behind me at the window display. A Victorian sex chair now stood in the space where the typewriter had been.
An exquisite machine,
the old man continued, his oily hands hovering over the contraption's keys.
Tang Dynasty, no less. Look at that gleaming return lever, this resplendent feed roller. Do your fingers not yearn to hammer hard upon those golden keys? Do you not hunger for the touch of its jewel-emblazoned ribbon reverse knob, the soft kiss of its diamond-adorned ribbon spool? Do you not dream of feeding your soft paper sheetage through its hard, studded platen?
I'm more interested in its mind, I said, curious to see whether or not he understood me. The old man examined me for a moment, a spark of recognition crossing his half-blind eyes.
Steen,
he said, nodding to himself.
Nick Steen, the horror writer.
Correct, I replied. But you're not Moses Unique. He grinned nervously then, his milky white orbs darting furtively from left to right. Hell, I knew him all right. But where from?
Buy me.
That voice again. Whatever it was, wherever it was coming from, it seemed to be reading my innermost thoughts. It, too, wanted me to buy the typewriter. And the strange thing was, I now felt like I was being forced, ordered, compelled, not tautologous, as there is a subtle difference between all three. I quickly did the math. Despite my fame, I knew I'd be unable to claim ancient antiquities against tax. I've tried several times, but no joy. Meaning I'd need to make my savings elsewhere. If I ceased all alimony payments and sent my ex-wife to live in rented accommodation at her own expense, selling all my daughter's non-transportable toys, I might just be able to afford it without dipping into any of my own money. Given that Jacinta had yet to forgive me for press-ganging our daughter into an early proofreading career, It would hardly come as a surprise to her if I suddenly recommenced hostilities out of the blue. And I wouldn't need to worry about any legal challenge either. Early on in my career, I'd refused to co-write anything with another human being, including my marriage certificate, for which I'd employed several pseudonyms. So any potential ex-wife would need to descend all 9 circles of hell in order to extract a single penny from my mounting fortunes. And if this typewriter really was the one I'd been seeking, those fortunes would soon be mounting even higher. Soon I'd be writing darker, more terrifying novels than any I dared write before, famed the whole world over as the greatest horror writer who'd ever lived. Then, finally, Ros Bloom, my editor at Clackett Publishing, would realise once and for all that I don't need an editor. If this typewriter was the one. The old man swallowed another eel and tapped his finger against the discount sticker. Was the thing truly magical like I'd been told?
I am indeed.
Damn it, that voice again. Either I was going mad or some presence, some force, seemed to be communicating with me from deep within my own mind, plumbing the murkiest depths of my subconscious. And then it hit me. Maybe the typewriter itself was already trying to communicate with me.
Yes.
If that was true, there could no longer be any doubt in my mind. The machine perched in front of me truly had to be the one I'd been seeking. The key to unlocking my deepest, darkest nightmares.
That's right, I am.
I froze. That voice in my head, it was the typewriter's voice. As unbelievable as it might seem, the typewriter itself was speaking to me.
Eureka!
Then this really was it, beyond all doubt. After an endless, painstaking search of several hours, the hunt was finally over. The machine I had sought was finally in my grasp.
And will you be purchasing?
Asked the old man with a hint of a sly grin. I will, I replied, pulling out my credit card. But I'll need a VAT receipt.
Oh,
He said, hands fumbling uselessly in both pockets.
we only take cash.
Then put it on my slate, having first set me up with said slate, I said, reaching for the typewriter. But somehow, it was already there, in my arms. Ouch! I snapped suddenly, feeling my right index finger snag sharply against part of its mechanism. The old man chuckled, tucking into another eel.
You have just felt, sir, the delicious, castigating pinch of its dormant ribbon vibrator.
Go easy on those eels, I said. He winked at me.
Does your rod not harden at the coy wink of its sparkling type bar?
I ignored him and walked back over to the door and my Honda Civic parked beyond. Then turned again in a final attempt to place the man's features. But his face was now masked by the plastic container, which he tipped upwards at one corner to gulp down what remained. I stepped outside, yanked open my car door and placed the typewriter down on the passenger seat, then found myself attaching the seatbelt across its front.
Thanks.
You're welcome, I said, getting in beside it and keying the ignition. Before pulling out, I turned to address it directly, realizing I would look stir-crazy to anyone passing by. Fortunately, the street was still entirely empty. Let me make one thing perfectly clear, I said, leaning over towards it. Yes, you may be ancient. Yes, you may possess untold powers beyond the ken of man. But from this moment on, you work for me, capiche? I'm the master, and you do my bidding.
Sure. Whatever you say.
I grinned, pleased we'd reached an early understanding, and keyed the engine.
Cowboy.
I glanced back for a second, confused, then pulled out onto the main road, sucking the blood from my injured finger. One year later. Chapter 2. I woke, hot and sweaty, in my bed. By the number of fresh salt rings accrued on my pleather sheet, I could tell it was mid-afternoon. I rose up, peeled back the soiled rubber underlining, and unclamped my nipples from the typewriter's tab plates. Hell, if Ros could see me now. I extracted what little remained of my leather briefs, which the machine had ordered me to wear. This pair had finally taken the ultimate battering, obliterated by the typewriter's frenzied all-night hammering. I drew the last sheet of paper from my master the Platen and perused the results of our nocturnal labours. 5 paragraphs of runic symbols and a swarm of ellipses, plus the font had swollen from 12 point to 24 and was quietly throbbing. A hard night's work indeed. I breathed a sigh of relief that day had finally dawned, albeit with the sun already waning, and prayed that the timer on my filter machine had kicked in. Every orifice and appendage I possessed had been either probed or thrashed into oblivion nightly for the past 12 months by what was in essence a mechanical keyboard, and now even brewing the morning coffee was a physical trial. It had all begun so beautifully that magical evening I'd pulled back my sheets to find it lying there in my bed, outer casing entirely removed, with a single red rose placed provocatively over the keypad, alongside other necessities from the Boots family planning aisle. I tried to reassure myself that what followed that night and the nights after was natural, romantic even, that our frenzied thrashing was born of a mutual understanding, that as long as the prose I produced with it was good, then it could have me anyway, anyhow, anywhere. Not any time, as I had a book signing tour scheduled for the last 2 weeks in June, but July and August were currently free and ripe for intensive creative frottage. And as far as I knew, I was now writing sophisticated horror, as promised. The darkest, sickest, dare I say, sexiest writing of my career. I wouldn't call my new work perverted, certainly when compared to what the typewriter and I were getting up to outside office hours. But my books were radical, polemical, and apparently already evolving mankind, if reports from the Institute of Zoology were anything to go by and squirrel monkeys really were learning to wipe their backsides with my discarded proofs. Yes, the content was heavily erotic, but as the typewriter had explained, weren't writing and making love both acts of creation? Then why not combine them? After all, wasn't this merely that repressed, subconscious darkness I'd been seeking? Hadn't the typewriter simply tapped into a long-repressed love for my own mind? A deep, passionate lusting after my own creativity? Wasn't all this mechanical slap and tickle simply the potent primal roaring of Nick Steen's own particular form of hellbeast? Sure, I was tired, spent, soiled, invariably humiliated, but finally I was learning to live with my internal monster. There was just one small problem. My books were no longer selling. As I caught the faint aroma of brewing coffee drifting through from the kitchen, the phone on my bedside table rang. I gave the typewriter's Platen knob a playful squeeze to let it know I was still up for more, and picked up the receiver. "Nick Steen," I announced, "horror author and visionary doomscribe." "It's me, Nick." I knew who it was. "Who's this?" I said. "It's me, Nick." "Wrong. I'm Nick. You're a stranger." "It's Roz." Like I said, a stranger. "I know you're being brave, Nick, that deep down you're still angry I fired you, but at the end of the day you're the one partaking in kinky liaisons with an ancient typewriter, not me." At least she was finally accepting the thing was sentient. I'd never expected Roz to embrace the notion wholesale when I first mentioned this new tool in my writing arsenal, but I'd presumed, being an editor, she'd be interested at the literary level if nothing else. But the very thought of my own physical debasement via the prongs of a sadistic typing machine, dispensing total and unrelenting physical punishment, had somehow left her cold. So she'd fired me. "You're a fool, Roz. Last night that machine and I plumbed untold depths of forbidden pleasure, explored uncharted ecstasies of physical suffering, achieved obscene and frankly unacceptable levels of pain-racked pleasure, though I do have to have a quiet word with it about the nipple twisting. That's delicate tissue and can cause long-term damage." "I'm not interested in your sordid trysts, Nick. I called to tell you that I've now fulfilled my final contractual obligations and submitted your latest manuscript to Clackett Publishing like you asked, without my recommended changes." Well, well, well. So Roz did have a few surprises left in her. Maybe she was warming to the typewriter after all. "Not a single edit?" I said, wanting to ensure things were precisely as I'd demanded. "Nothing. I submitted it exactly as you instructed." "All 12,000 pages?" "Actually, I took out one ank. I snarled inwardly. Which ankh? It may have been a pentacle. Or was it an ankh or a pentacle? It was a pentacle. Put the pentacle back in. If you insist. The Platon whipped back suddenly, hammering my left ball. And add an extra ankh. Whatever you say. That's more like it, Ros, I said, tending my bruised conker. Not hard, is it? I suppose not. Sorry, Ros, I was thinking aloud. I clenched my teeth and tried to savour the dull, aching throb emanating from down below, like the typewriter had told me to. But if I'm honest, I wasn't quite feeling it this morning. So what did Clackett say? They passed. Passed? The Platon retracted violently the other way, ripping free a generous thatch of my densest pubery. I shrieked. It's no good getting upset, Nick. They're hugely concerned about the financial implications of these new manuscripts you're delivering. And they have my sympathy, given that each one requires a significant amount of industrial scaffolding to support its multiple volumes and mini-library of appendices, plus a custom-built house crane to turn the pages. Productivity had been an issue, it was true. According to the typewriter's manual, the machine worked by tapping directly into the user's brain, enabling them to channel their visions directly through its own internal mechanism, which meant that my words, and more importantly my thoughts, could be harnessed instantly and produced at 5,000 times my usual rate. Potentially, that number might even reach infinity, again according to the manual, though most of it was in Chinese. And more importantly, with your current productivity rate of 1 multi-volume tome each half day, Ros continued, serious environmental questions are now being raised at head office. Such as? Such as, should Clackett be responsible for decimating the natural resources of several developing nations in order to manufacture your Daimonica flagellatum quindecimology, which has yet to earn back a single percentage of its investment or even make it out of the factory gate? At this current rate of deforestation, Nick, you're likely to go down in history as the man who single-handedly destroyed our natural world. Did they say anything else? Just that it was cack. I nodded, sensing that this had been coming for a while now. Clackett still hadn't delivered me my author's copies, and had instead given me some bull about the book potentially compromising the structural integrity of my apartment block. Look, Ros, I said, deciding to switch on the charm. We've known each other a long time. You were there at the very beginning of my career, when I first started out with Hives, a semi-autobiographical horror thriller about a sentient skin disease. Thanks to your slight help, I soon became the pioneering voice of rasher fiction, a violent subgenre of flesh ailment-related horror novels. Within months, we'd published The Itching, Sunburner, Woe Betide, The Shingler, Night of the Eczeman, Eczeman 2, Dermodisis, Rosacea's Baby, The Swelling, The Burning, The Flaking, The Crusting, A Scab in the Dark, Scabman 1, Scabman 2, Return of the Scabman, Scabman 3, No Pickin', Psychoriasis, The Bleeder 1, Psychoriasis 2, The Bleeder 2, Psychoriasis 3, Revenge of the Fleshheads, also known as Bleeder vs. Scabman. Geez, Ros, in just over a year we'd each earned over £400. Of course, Nick, how could I forget? I heard it in her voice. A softening. I was getting there, stoking memories of times past, memories of us, of that skin disease I'd inadvertently spread throughout Clackett with an ill-advised handshake upon signing my initial contract, which only brought us closer. We were in the same ward. We used to understand each other, Ros. We used to click. First through the overwhelming local success of my Rasher series, then via a genuine shared interest in our persistent skin conditions. Who knows where we might have ended up one day? Maybe we'd have spent long, hazily romantic afternoons at some dermatological clinic, followed by late-night booze-fueled erotic sessions of mutual examination fantasy and itch play. Nick, I have to go. Apologies, that's the typewriter speaking. It has me looking for the erotic in pretty much everything I do these days. Look, I know you respected my writing back then, Ros. Believed in my visions, however terrifyingly provocative or socially unacceptable they might have been. Yet now, when I'm breaking down genre boundaries, challenging conventional logic, evolving mankind, forcing it to face and ultimately conquer its deepest, darkest fears, you're pulling out on me for the sake of some trees. No company we've contacted can replant at a sustainable rate, Nick. Not my problem, Ros. And to be frank, I think the real issue here is that you're upset because I told you I was getting increasingly fresh with my typing implement. Because you've changed, Nick, she said, wiping away tears. And yes, I could hear her doing that. Ever since you bought that damn typewriter, your work's become more intense, more crazed, more... Radical? I asked, interrupting, because Roz did have a tendency to bang on. No, Nick. Rubbish. She spat out the word, and if there hadn't been a phone between us, and a cable, and walls, plus several streets, lines of traffic, etc., I'd have copped it full in the eye. Your books are now incomprehensible, confused, meaningless, an insane collection of bizarre runic signs and jumbled wordless nonsense, which you somehow think contains some shred of meaning. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were either raving mad, Nick, or that typewriter you bought is cursed. I looked over at the machine. It was no longer on my bed, but had somehow managed to maneuver itself into my ensuite, where it was now busy taking a shower. I think you could be right, Roz. Whatever it is, Clackett want nothing more to do with you, and neither do I, Nick. Neither do I. I heard you the first time, Roz. Goodbye, then. Only let me tell you something before I go. I'm writing the best horror fiction of my career, and there's plenty more of it to come. And if Clackett don't publish it, someone will. No, Nick, they won't, because we'll all be dead before then. You can't stop visionary horror, Roz. I won't be shackled or censored by the frightened primitive pagans who run today's publishing industry. So go tell Tony Clackett to shove my manuscript up his arse, where it can fester and consume his sorry behind from deep within his eternally ulcerated intestinal wall. Because the world might well be a dark place, Roz, but my fiction is darker. And if you think I'm going to go down without spreading a little of that darkness into people's lives, people who need a little ray of darkness, Roz, then you're wrong, and you'd best have another think. I slammed the phone down, aggrieved that Roz had already slammed down hers halfway through my speech. It was over then. My writing career was dead. I heard the typewriter sluicing out its mechanism inside the shower cubicle. Sighing, I stood up, prepared as usual to go and scrub clean my Master the Platen, when I stumbled across the sheet of paper it had left on the floor by my feet. Buy more ribbon. I got dressed and obeyed. Chapter 3. On my way back from the stationer's, I detoured via that lonely side street off Stalkford's town centre, which I'd never noticed before that day a year ago, hoping that the typewriter's 14,000-year warranty, which had run out the night before, might still be honoured. But the street, when I reached it, was even emptier than before, because Uniquity's Ink plus Eels wasn't there. In its place stood a derelict shoesmith's due for demolition, according to an official notice nailed to its door. In fact, the entire street was condemned in order to make way for a new department store, scheduled for construction in the coming months. I cast my eyes over the numerous boarded-up windows and torn refuse sacks scattered across the road and pavement. Had this place ever been populated? The shoesmith's itself looked as if it had been established centuries ago. So why had it resembled a mysterious-looking curiosity shop the last time I'd visited? My mind began to wander, and as it did, an image flashed suddenly into my brain. The shop owner. That old man in the rubber apron who drank down eels. Moses Unique. I suddenly remembered where I'd seen his face before. But it couldn't be him, surely. It just couldn't. Could it? I cast my mind back to a memory I'd hoped would remain buried deep in my subconscious. A guilty secret I'd never once revealed to any other human being. A minor incident, really, in the grand scheme of things. As a boy, I used to deliver newspapers by hand to an elderly retired writer of occult supernatural fiction by the name of Algernon Tench. I often found him trapped on his lounge commode, so one day took the opportunity to read him one of my own fledgling efforts in the genre. That may sound presumptuous, but I looked upon it as a kindness, an act of charity, a gentle reminder, shall we say, that time had moved on, horror fiction had changed irrevocably since his day, and he shouldn't keep wasting everyone's time trying to stave off the inevitable. It did the trick, as the particular story I read him was so gruesome, so shocking, so violently visceral, that he literally suffered a cardiac arrest as I was reading it to him, having first begun to weep bitterly about the decline of Western civilization. But that wasn't what troubled me. Nor was it the fact that, in my youthful arrogance, I'd torn up one of his own books in front of his face in an effort to shift him from the commode, hoping the spiritual agony of seeing his life's work being shredded with such radical and anarchic courage might somehow break the vacuum trapping both cheeks. No, it was a minor detail that bothered me. Something I might easily have remedied but had refused to, with a smile on my face too, if I remember. Call it arrogance, call it the usual dose of professional jealousy, call it demonstrating once and for all that the old dinosaurs era was extinctified. But the truth was that as I left that old boy lying there on the floor in a pool of his own effluence, I'd taken the only toilet roll he had left, and I'd never forgotten that look on his face as he'd mopped himself dry with his own Victorian triple-decker Gothic novel. That's why I recognised the old bastard. Yet how could it be him? That doddering old crock was dead. Footnote. Or was he? Whatever the reality, it looked like I was now stuck with the damn typewriter after all. If Uniquity's Ink plus Eels could no longer refund me what I hadn't paid, I guess I'd have to get rid of the thing myself. But somehow, I didn't think it would be too happy about that. I stopped off at the newsagent opposite to check how my latest book was selling. Diabolus Apocalypsicum Penetratio was still there in the corner of the shop, standing on one end and towering over the neighbouring rack of conventional-sized paperbacks. Despite a width, or height depending on the angle from which you looked, exceeding 9 feet, I saw it was priced significantly lower than it had been the previous week. "Not selling, Gavin?" I asked the proprietor, whose name was Gavin. "No one can see the cover," Gavin replied surlily. "Plus it's mainly asterisks." He was wrong there. The back cover blurb contained more parentheses than asterisks, but no one could read that either. The novel's rear end sat hard against the shop floor, imprisoned by the sheer weight of the pages stacked above it. Browsing the book's contents would require strong arms and a portable stepladder. Even then, the book would most likely destroy a supporting wall if toppled. I moved to the paperback rack beside it and picked up one of my earlier novels. Clackett had reissued The Slothman Prophecies, my novel about the sinister Slothman, a mythical yet sedentary furred figure prophesying apocalyptic catastrophes after the event. Admittedly, the book hadn't sold well on its initial run, let alone the reprint, but I'd grown tired of debating the supposed plot hole with critics who had no grasp of reverse interdimensional time warp barrier theory. Yet part of me was beginning to wish someone had pre-warned me about the Diabolus Apocalypsicum Penetratio problem. It was all very well penning oblique and unfathomable scrolls of cosmic doom writ in the hieroglyphical parlance of fictional elder gods, but if no one possessed the ability to read them... I stepped away from the dark, imposing shadow my latest novel was casting over the shop's interior, and reflected on the practicalities of penning literally groundbreaking works. If I continued at my current rate, all the world's newsagents and remainder outlets might require racks the size of the Giza Pyramid complex to store even a fraction of my continued output. Despairing, I grabbed Slothman from the rack and was preparing to harangue Gavin for failing to refresh its price stamp. After several years, removing a reduced sticker can potentially rip away the gloss lining of a paperback, so it must be replaced regularly. Gavin knew this. When a hand grabbed my wrist. I was about to grab it back with my remaining hand when I saw that the hand grabbing my hand was different from the standard human hand, containing an index finger thrice the length of a conventional digit. Suspicious, my eyes followed the hand to its wrist and saw that the arm it belonged to protruded from the sleeve of a clerical cassock. I smiled knowingly to myself. There was only one clergyman in all of Stalkford that suffered from the advanced stages of phalangic stalk syndrome, and that was the Reverend Kenny Marmon, Dean of Vampton, whom I'd met last year at the skin clinic. "Morning, Kenny," I said.
"Beware, Nick Steen,"
he replied.
"Beware."
"I heard you the first time, Kenny." I stepped back from him, let go of my arm. His finger, which had remained wrapped around my wrist despite the rest of his hand letting go, finally uncurled, releasing me. For a moment, I felt a strange burning sensation there, as if the grasp of God himself had seized my flesh, found my soul wanting, and passed judgment upon me. That, or Kenny had recently applied deep heat.
"You're doomed, Nick,"
Kenny said, thrusting his prehensile protuberance upwards into the air beside his head. No wonder church attendance was down.
Doomed!
Again, I heard you the first time.
This morning I received a letter,
He continued, ignoring me.
typed in squalid detail with the most foul, unholy, and blasphemous accounts of thy hellish coupling.
Kenny had been doing that a lot lately, talking like a crazed Puritan elder. It was probably a byproduct of the finger issue, but it always seemed specifically directed at me. Is this about me sleeping with a typewriter? I asked, masking my private annoyance at Roz. Trust her to have spilled the beans, no doubt deciding in her editorial wisdom that my so-called perversions required divine intervention. Kenny stared grimly at me, still holding up the finger.
9 circles of hell there be, Nickstein.
Ah, I said, as he jabbed his finger upwards even further, perilously close to the ceiling fan.
9!
He continued, ignoring my correction, even though I was the writer here.
Yet the brethren and I have prayed in light of your unforgivable sin of fornicating with a typing machine for a 10th. You have set yourself against God, Nickstein. You are destroying his world, decimating his glorious temple of creation, bringing the whole edifice down on our worthy heads through your blasphemous sins. For thou hast signed a pact, Nickstein, a Faustian pact, with Satan, the dark lord of misrulery.
I know who he is, Kenny. But he had a point. Thinking about it, the deal I'd struck with the typewriter did indeed resemble a Faustian pact. I'd signed my real name enough times on the sheets of paper it sprawled, which was presumably binding from a pact perspective. But as far as I understood it, the chief lure of a Faustian pact is that the recipient is supposed to enjoy the fruits of a doomed covenant for decades before the inevitable demonic bailiffs come clawing. Yet mine were already swarming about me with no discernible evidence of worldly success beyond what I'd already achieved for myself without them. Instead of the endless nubile wenches I might have been picking from, I was instead drawing all earthly physical ecstasies from an outdated metallic appliance. Some pact, I said aloud.
A confession?
Kenny screamed.
The witch hath confessed?
Calm down, I said, aware his finger was rising higher all the time, ever closer to the whirring fan blades above us. If I have signed a Faustian pact, then I no longer retain any statutory rights in the matter, so there's not much I can do about it. Incidentally, your finger—
What about my finger?
Kenny screamed, suddenly enraged. But instead of heeding the warning I was about to give him, he raised the digit even higher, intending to preach me a full sermon. Its tip struck the rotating fan blades overhead, shearing the distal phalanx clean off. The severed lump flew off in the direction of the tills, striking Gavin in the left eye, while the cheap fan blades splintered, tilting upwards with a sudden impact. Kenny shrieked and flailed below them, blood pumping violently in large spurts from his sliced joint. My head swam amid an explosion of horror. Blood rained from the upended blades onto my unsold books, instantly devaluing them, while the dark shadow of Diabolus Apocalypsicum Penetratio now seemed to be moving of its own accord, looming over us both, smothering Kenny's screams amid a cloud of darkness. I realized that the vast tome was leaning at a slant. Air from the fan's tilted blades was blasting into its piled pages, flipping and fluttering them apart in their thousands, until the sheer force of shifting weight teetered the vast spine backwards, sending my latest masterwork toppling. A burst of thunder exploded somewhere above us. Kenny stared in terror, frozen to the spot, as, with a colossal and terrifying creak, Diabolus Apocalypsicum Penetratio collapsed.
Curse ye, Nickstein!
Kenny yelled under the fast-approaching monolith and was immediately crushed flat. All I could see of him when the dust cleared were his legs and arms sticking out either side of my toppled masterpiece. The remnants of his deformed index finger curled upwards from the impromptu grave, twitching like the crooked limb of a dying insect, each slowing death spasm flipping another page of the book under which he lay buried. At least they could see the cover now. Maybe Faustian packs weren't so bad after all. Except that they were. Of course they were. And if I needed any proof, the heavens tore open as I headed back home, pelting me with torrential rain and blinding shafts of ethereal light. Clearly, God was seriously hacked off about me destroying his natural world with my dangerously increased productivity rate. I guess I was effectively ousting his career, running roughshod over his glorious creation exactly in the way I'd done to that old author I'd refused to wipe clean years before. The celestial maelstrom appeared to hover directly over me alone, even following me into the underpass. Yet, drenched as I was, I still paused, as I always did, on the forecourt before Hellview Heights, the imposing executive apartment block I'd made my permanent home, in order to reflect upon the astounding treasures my mind had gifted me up until now. Yet today was different. As I watched the storm clouds massed above the imposing concrete tower, its grim edifice lit frequently by great flashes of purple lightning, I realised that the heady thrill of basking in my own literary glow was now gone. In its place existed the grim, dawning realisation that things no longer quite added up. Kenny's mention of a Faustian pact had truly set me thinking. Those earlier novels I'd penned had earned me enough to move into Stalkford's most affluent district, with a fiercely contested top-floor executive apartment suite overlooking the distant cosmos and also outer Stalkford. But since I'd bought the typewriter, sales had plummeted. I'd been fired by my publisher, and no one appeared to understand a single word of the complex prose I was churning out. Worse still, I was deemed an environmental menace, the Dark Duke of Deforestation. According to the typewriter's manual, I was meant to have secured access to the deepest, darkest abyss of my subconscious mind. Yet all I really had to show for my efforts was a fetishistic sadomasochist interest in the thing itself, which was becoming increasingly temperamental. Things were changing for the worse, and not just in the bedroom department. Against the heavy rumble of thunder overhead came a sharp proclamatory fanfare of trumpets. I saw his angels gathering in a flock far above me, their long, styled manes swept back over vinyl trench coats as they prepared to carry me off to some form of distant divine punishment. Unperturbed, I gave his angelic host the finger, boldly crossed the forecourt of Hellview Heights and strode through into its main entrance lobby. There was another priest on the visitor's couch, and two more blocking the parcel lockers, all warning my soul to jump ship from this mortal frame. Kenny's brethren, I realised. I barged past them to retrieve my mail, which included a replacement Platen knob I couldn't recall ordering, and walked back round to the elevators. There was another priest inside the lift, which explained why it hadn't been working for the last few months. He'd barricaded himself within and plastered the walls, ceiling and floor with pages from the Bible, plus a few good-time nun pics, and had apparently only just rediscovered where the emergency button was. Now that the interior had been flushed out by a team of janitors, the lift had once more resumed business. He continued to yell dire warnings at me all the way to the top floor. My blind and deaf neighbour, Mrs. Brown, rode with us the entire way, oblivious to the noise, grinning inanely as the lift's swift ascension tickled her ancient and barely functional tummy. With her advanced age and state of bodily decrepitude, I guess she got her kicks where she could. As I moved through the parting doors, a blast of sudden lightning hit the outer building, frying the lift's cheaply manufactured electrical circuits. As the elevator plunged violently downwards to the lower floors, the priest's shriek echoing back up the shaft alongside Mrs. Brown's final bout of soft chuckling, things finally grew quiet again. Something seemed to be protecting me alone from God's wrath. I approached the door to my apartment and let myself in. I moved through the entrance hallway, which was adorned with framed paintings of my various book cover illustrations, a canny investment, as I now own the copyright as well and could potentially sue each artist for selling prints, plus medical photographs of assorted brain x-rays. These were mainly of my own, but I'd also requested those of Paul McKenna for comparison. Moving through into the lounge, I saw that there was a freshly brewed mug of coffee awaiting me on my desk, steam rising from its gold-plated rim. I crossed over to the typewriter and placed the new ink ribbon down on the desk beside it, along with the replacement platen knob. There was a blank page already spooled through the machine. I picked up my mug, sniffed the subtle aromas of the recently ground beans, blew steam from the surface, and closed my eyes, preparing to savour my initial sip. When I opened them again, a freshly typed message awaited me on the spooled page. Evening. Evening, I replied. The keys began to hammer. Of their own accord. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I say hardly because I had been having sex with the thing after all, and though at times I'd tried to fool myself that it was just me role-playing the entire sordid escapade, deep down I'd always known that my hammer-hard lover had a genuine personality. Perhaps not feelings as such, but here at last was proof that the thing had a fully functioning mind. Have you eaten? I bought a pork pie from the spa, you? More hammering. I was waiting for you. Sorry, I got held up. More hammering. Who is she? Nobody. More hammering. Liar. I'm telling you the truth, I got waylaid at the newsagent. More hammering. You bought my ribbon? Right here. I attached it delicately, trying not to get too aroused. It was shameful to admit it, but essential typing maintenance now caused me colossal throbbing. I see you managed to order a replacement platen knob easily enough by yourself, though, I asked pointedly. More hammering. Look, I'm going to stop adding more hammering because you get the idea. You'll find I'm full of surprises. You're not wrong, I said, suddenly detecting a freshly completed manuscript on my out pile. What the hell is that? Your next novel. I picked it up, perusing the contents. A cold feeling shot through me. I hadn't written a word of it. It's only the prologue. Look, I said sternly. Let's get one thing straight. My books are my books. I don't co-write. You do now. No, I do not. Your books are mine, bitch. Excuse me? I snapped. No one writes my books except me alone. Now, I pay good money for you to do one job, which was to help free my subconscious imagination and unleash its hellish visions. Plus bonk. That wasn't a stipulation I was aware of until you ravished me in that first session. And while we're on the subject, I said, getting cross now. Hell, it looked like it was all going to come out. I'm getting just a little bit tired with you always wanting my body day and night. I'm an individual with feelings and sensitivities, and I have a right to come here now and do me, cowboy. And damn it if I didn't do just that. Was I compelled? Was it really the pursuit of insane sexual oblivion I craved deep down? Did I imagine the thing loved me somehow? Or did I think, with its newfound desire to write my books without me even being present, that instead it loved my writing? Yes, that was it, wasn't it? I believed it was in love with my writing. Despite all evidence to the contrary, I somehow convinced myself at that mad, insane moment that it loved and respected my words, those hellish visions forever swimming around in the primordial swamp of my inner psyche. I tugged on the pair of fresh leather pants it flung at me, Japanese Wagyu leather for extra give, stood before it and waited. And waited. And waited. Until, teasingly, the tender message came through. Kiss goodbye to your balls. Then an explosion of light and sound. The typewriter suddenly went all crackly like a sparkler, and a mighty tornado blew the pants clean from my body in one rip, as several long blood-flecked chains shot out from both tabular keys and pierced my chest nipples. These dragged me violently, limbs flailing towards the spacebar, catapulting me upwards over the keys to face my master, the platen. I continued typing, despite myself, as the cylindrical shaft rolled lecherously around, sucking me in, winding my exposed rod deep between the mashing mangle. Then it was back to business. Another deeply sordid and socially unacceptable act of literary creation. Yet one infinitely more potent, painful, and punishing than any I'd conducted before. Now I really was the typewriter's bitch. as my member meshed with metal, and the body and brain I'd surrendered finally fused with the machine's mechanical, metallic clutches, I thought suddenly of Roz and how she'd really dodged a bullet by firing me. Howling with delirious agony, my brain's pummeled thoughts melting like hot butter between the typewriter's probing keys, I glanced down, insensate, at the mounting sheets of paper piled beside us, and the words typed upon them. Your world will be mine. Chapter 4. I placed another pile of completed manuscript in each corner of the kitchen floor, attempting to distribute the weight as evenly as possible. I'd awoken to the ominous sound of crumbling cement and a sudden shifting of the bedroom floor, realizing, as I frantically scrubbed grains of interrupted sleep from my eyes, that if the giant tome we'd completed overnight remained in its current position for one moment longer, we might well be moving production to the lower floors. I've just had these tiles redone, I moaned, observing fresh cracks in the grouting. There was no audible response from the machine, which didn't surprise me. There'd been no coffee awaiting me this morning either. I mopped my sweating brow and moved back through to my study to tackle the remaining sections, which I'd already spent 2 hours desperately rearranging into safer piles around the lounge. Unfortunately, my entire apartment was now creaking like an old ship. The wall nearest my bookshelf had formed a visible slant, and according to the paramedic who knocked on my door an hour later, several sections of ceiling plaster had fallen onto the tenant living immediately below, braining him. Fortunately, his injuries, while severe, were unlikely to affect the structural integrity of my own flat. I picked up yet another pile, around 1,000 pages I estimated, and wondered where the hell I was going to put it all. We're out of space, I said. A clatter of keys, then I looked down at the typewriter's freshly spooled page. So put it in the fridge. Fridge is full, bath's full, showers reserved. Damn right, scrubber. I thought now was as good a time as any to raise the sensitive subject of nipple tweaking. You do realise teats are tender areas for men. You love it. I don't actually. Exquisite pain's one thing, teat twisting is quite another. Nipple piercing? That's okay as long as you respect my safe word. Fucking stop. That's the one. Technically it was 2 words, but a change from living metaphor at least, which didn't exactly trip off the tongue in the heat of battle. I slammed the pile on the desk beside the machine and sat down, casually leafing through the manuscript we'd supposedly completed together. I say supposedly completed together because there was no way on earth I'd written a single word of this garbage. It was all symbols, asterisks, ampersands, hyphens, glyphs, hieroglyphs, logograms, that German-looking skull thing you get in Asterix books when someone's swearing. Total nonsense. A vast and impenetrable collection of elliptical symbols conveying no meaning whatsoever. How the hell hadn't I realised it before? What had really been happening? Ever since I'd seen those pages the typewriter had produced without me being there, it was as if a veil had fallen suddenly from my eyes. No longer could I pretend that there had been any meaning in the novels I'd been churning out for over a year now. No more could I continue lying to myself that the complexity of the prose I'd been producing was somehow so advanced that mankind itself needed to evolve further in order to comprehend it. No wonder no one was buying my books, because no amount of internal plot sense and narrative know-how could hide the fact that not a single word of this stuff had ever been mine. For the past year, I'd been producing nothing but bollocks. This is bollocks, I said. Show me your bollocks. Will you take bloody 5? I snapped, getting shirty. I just about had enough of being its sex toy. There was no way Clackett would ever publish a book like this, I realised, even if they hadn't already refused to. And even if I sent it to Roz anyway, she'd take one look at the proportions alone and immediately start suggesting cuts, which, even though I didn't understand a word of what I'd written, I would instinctively oppose. Things had ground to a complete halt for me creatively. Unless, of course, what the typewriter had written last night without my input was so visionary, so damn radical, that even I couldn't understand it. The typewriter clacked again. Buy me these. I drew out the sheet and looked down at another list of items. There was no way I'd find these in a stationery shop. What are 2 black miracles of mortal clay? You and one other. I didn't know what the typewriter had in mind, but its demands were growing increasingly strange. Who's the other? The reply, when it came, chilled me to the bone. Roz. Damn, the thing was after my editor now. Leave Roz out of this. Then you are seeing her. I'm not seeing anybody. As you well know, Roz sacked me when she discovered you and I were having a torrid physical affair, and I respect that decision. Even if I don't respect her editorial judgment, I do respect her willingness to condemn the sadomasochistic practices of a former professional client and his supernatural writing implement. Bring me Roz away. Or your nipples really get it. I stood there in silence, defiant, then shuddered involuntarily. What the hell did it want with my erstwhile editor? We arranged to meet for old time's sake at the dermatological clinic. Roz had an appointment there for her psoriasis and had reserved an extra hour for us in one of the powder rooms. I took her a pot of E45 as a peace offering, and she, unexpectedly and rather movingly given our recent falling out, gifted me a fresh tube of hydrocortisone cream. Mind if I spread here? I asked. Go ahead, she replied, tucking the pot of E45 into her handbag. You can apply some too, Roz, I said. I won't peek. It's okay, I'm freshly lathered from my appointment. How is it at the moment? I asked, unbuckling my slacks and applying a generous layer to my flanks and haunches. Knees and elbows still rough, but the scalp's improving. Good, I'm pleased, I said, lifting my left leg upwards to smooth the reddened area under my groin. You don't mind? I said, checking again. This time she averted her eyes. I picked the brand especially, she said, transferring her gaze to an information poster outlining the potential risks of excessive talc application. It calms the body's immune response in order to reduce pain, itching, and inflammation. That's swelling, right? I said, generating some initial small talk. Yes, she replied. It's also a hormone replacement for those who don't produce enough cortisol. Yours is mixed with antimicrobials, incidentally. I didn't know if you were still treating a bacterial or fungal infection. You chose right, I said, smiling softly as I stripped and moved on to my top half. I appreciate that, Roz, I really do. What did you want to see me about? All in good time, I said, feeling more relaxed than I had done in over a year. This was top-grade hydrocortisone. Maybe Roz was softening towards me. Must have cost you more than a basic prescription. It's on repeat. Repeat? I repeated, suddenly suspicious. For you? No, it can't have been for her. Roz's infections were never predominantly fungal, as far as I recalled. I noted she hadn't replied. Hell, I should have seen this coming. Met him at a psoriasis clinic as well, did you? I said, coldly. Soon as we're through, you hire some other flaking writer, probably half my age and twice as scaled. All the while ordering more items than you actually need on his prescription so you can hawk the surplus to score petty points with me. I haven't hired anyone, Nick. Really, Roz? I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed and sitting up to face her. I'm not sure I believe you. Look, Nick, what do you want? I saw tears forming in her eyes. She was right. Her scalp had improved. I'll level with you, Roz. I want you back as my editor. That's not going to happen. I want another book deal. That's not going to happen either. Look, I said, exasperated. I can prove the rubbish I've been writing this year is entirely the work of my typewriter. That's it, Nick, I'm leaving. Wait, Roz, I said, screwing the lid back on the hydrocortisone tube. I admit I bought that typewriter to access the darkest depths of my subconscious psyche and thus restrict your editing influence to grammar alone. Please, Nick. But the truth is, Roz, you're right. I have changed since buying that typewriter. I'd never have considered fornicating with a writing machine before then, and for the life of me, I can't see how or why I get off on it now. I think the thing is cursed, like you said. I think I've unwittingly signed some kind of Faustian pact with a haunted writing implement. It talks to me, Roz, and this morning it gave me this. I handed her the typed list, which she quickly read. What are these 2 black miracles of mortal clay? According to the typewriter, that's you and me, Roz. For some reason, it wants us both. Why? I don't know. All I know is that I'm no longer writing my own books. and what is being written makes no sense whatsoever. Maybe it needs an editor. She walked across the room, continuing to examine the list in her hand. What's a dark key of dreams? I've got no idea, neither did Timson. She turned back to face me, her expression deadly serious. I think this is black magic, Nick. I think you're right about a Faustian pact. These look like ingredients for some kind of ritual, a terrifying satanic rite. Relax, Roz. I doubt it's planning anything crazy like that. A mechanical typewriter organising some form of blasphemous secret ritual, with me, its owner and sexual plaything, blissfully unaware the entire time until at last something catastrophically deadly occurs when I least expect it. Really, Roz, that's like something out of one of my books. Nevertheless, I'm convinced that machine's up to something, Nick. Something involving you that you as yet have no idea about. And, if it has its way, something involving me too. Suddenly I remembered the letter. Incidentally, Roz, what were you doing discussing my sordid bedroom habits with Kenny Marmon? She shook her head, confused. Don't play dumb, Roz. Kenny Marmon, the Dean of Vampton, now deceased. Who? You sent him that letter, didn't you? I've never heard of him before now, Nick, let alone sent him any letter. Then I twigged. Kenny hadn't specified who'd sent him a letter, just that a letter had been sent. A typed letter. Damn it. The typewriter sent it, Roz. Told Kenny Marmon, the Dean of Vampton, about our frenzied bouts of abhorrent lust-making. And then Kenny told me that God and the church had renounced my soul, that I was eternally damned. He was crushed to death before my very eyes, Roz, by my own book. That means I'm now expelled, Roz. Expelled from heaven, like Satan before me. And it's all this typewriter's fault. Then you have to get rid of it, Nick, she said. It's clearly after you and me for some as yet undisclosed nefarious purpose. You're dabbling with satanic forces, Nick. Dark powers beyond your control. What do I do, Roz? Is it still under warranty? I sighed, shaking my head. Ran out the day before yesterday. Plus, the shop I bought it from has since mysteriously disappeared. You mean you've been hoodwinked into signing a Faustian pact about which you knew nothing and consumer rights no longer apply? It is the devil, Roz, I said, giving the Dark One his due. Then suddenly I had an idea. If the devil, Lord of Misrulery, routinely went back on his word, then why wouldn't he do so again? Maybe I could negotiate a fresh pact with Satan to undo my current pact with Satan. Roz, I'm going to renegotiate my current pact with Satan. Though he's evidently a tricky customer, I'm better schooled than most in the malevolent machinations of the infernal, and therefore confident I can come away with a good deal. You fool, Nick! You're playing with infernal fire. I want nothing to do with it. I glared at her, hardly able to believe my ears. I understand, Roz, I said coldly. Farewell then, fair weather friend. Thanks for the hydrocortisone. I crossed over to the door. If you need any help applying yours, you'd best ask someone else. Nick, she said longingly. I stopped, kept looking ahead of me for a moment as if I couldn't bear to hear what she was about to say, then turned around to face her again. Yes, Roz? What will you do when it finds out I'm not joining you? Won't it punish you even more? We stood there, gazing at each other from opposite ends of the powder room. The floating grains of talc made everything soft-focused and dustily romantic. For what was dust really, after all, but lovers' skin, dead and yet also sort of alive? Not that we were lovers, of course, but the science still applied. The cream will help, I said bravely, then turned and departed via the main door. She may well have whispered, "I'll miss you," once I'd gone, but I couldn't hear that from where I was, and as this is first-person narration and therefore not omniscient, we just won't know. Chapter 5. Can I get you a coffee or tea? I asked offhandedly, preferring not to encourage conversation with tradesmen. Do you have any chicken blood? As a matter of fact, I do. I've been trying my hand at augury to see if I could foretell any changes to my future with Clackett, but so far the bird's liver had failed to speak, ditto the entrails. Mug or goblet? Goblet if you have one. I went to the fridge and poured him a large helping from the carcass. Giblets? Please. 1 lump or 2?
2, please. Do you have any cartilage spare?
No cartilage, but I do have some sinew.
Sinew would be great, thanks.
I scraped him some out and closed the door, tutting again at the large scratch still visible on my newly tiled floor. I'd installed the fridge unit 6 months back, but the instructions had specified 2 heavy lifters, and neither Roz nor her aging mother had been anywhere near strong enough, though they had finally stumped up compensation for the damaged floor.
So you've been cursed, have you?
I checked again that the door of the lounge was shut, praying, to whom I wasn't sure, that the typewriter couldn't hear us. More of a satanic pact, really, I whispered, handing him the goblet. But one conducted illegally under false pretenses. Essentially, I was tricked into entering into a contract with the Dark One, and now he's reneging on the deal.
Sounds about right, the man said, sipping his drink.
So I want you to draft a new satanic pact to undo my current satanic pact. I have leverage courtesy of one unwilling female soul called Roz. That was harsh of me, I'll admit, but I was dealing with the devil. Plus, Roz had properly hacked me off. He plucked a shard of poultry bone from his beard and flicked it back into his drink. I grimaced inwardly. Though I was aware I'd hired a Satanist, I had no idea he'd be this far along the left-hand path.
And you're a horror writer, are you?
I hated the telepathy thing too. This guy knew everything I was thinking. I'd barely even considered phoning the local coven before he was there outside my door buzzing himself in. I'd asked if we could reconvene at his deconsecrated church, but it was apparently being hosed out after a particularly heavy night.
We seek doomed souls telepathically,
he explained, reading my mind again.
Then, once we're attuned to your aura, we aim to materialize in your mortal plane within 24 hours.
I nodded as something screamed from behind the fridge.
Sounds like you got a portal,
he said, looking past me. Portal?
We use them in sacrificial rites. Demons or dark angels generally materialize via portal or cloud if a ritual's conducted in the open. That's trickier these days, of course, orgy-wise.
He moved over to the fridge and peered around the back.
Yeah, there's one right here.
There was another disembodied scream, close yet distant at the same time.
From beyond the veil, I reckon,
he said, tapping at a dark patch on the wall I'd assumed was mildew.
Hear that disembodied wailing?
I listened again. The effect was impressive.
Immeasurable distances away, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you'll have to move this fridge.
Move it?
To open up the portal.
I'm not opening up any portal, and I'm not moving the fridge again. It needs at least 2 people or it scrapes the tiles. I manoeuvred him back into the middle of the room. Can we just get back to the contract?
You're the boss. Are you a successful author?
I was.
Pack's over then. Your side of it, anyway.
I hadn't signed a pact then. Now that I have signed one, my books aren't selling. Aren't I supposed to enjoy certain additional fruits before minions come to collect my soul? He took another swig from the goblet, chewed on the contents for a moment, then raised an eyebrow suggestively.
Have you experienced any sensuous, erotic delights?
I thought about that for a moment. Again, technically...
Pact's over then.
Yes, but it's sex with a... It isn't sex you'd expect.
I doubt it,
he said, draining the last of his poultry blood.
We're pretty hard to shock.
I lowered my voice to a whisper, keeping one eye on the lounge door. Look, I'll level with you. I'm in a highly destructive and damaging psychosexual relationship with my typewriter.
Then it is a cursed artifact.
You tell me, I said, exasperated. You're the one reading minds. He stared at me for a moment, doing just that.
I see you have a subconscious urge to do it with type bars.
Yes, I know that. It's all to do with a socially unacceptable love for my own writing, but now it's become something else entirely. I pulled the typewriter's list from my back pocket and handed it over. These are its demands. He ran his eye briefly over the typewriter's words, rolling his tongue quizzically against his cheek.
Who owned it before you?
No idea. It's eons old.
Eons?
He said, looking up suddenly. Well, Tang Dynasty, according to the manual, though the English translation's appalling.
And where is it now?
He asked. I thought you could read minds. He paused for a moment, thinking, then shook his head.
For some reason, I can't pick up its own thoughts.
I pointed conspiratorially at the lounge door behind us. In there. He glanced over at the door, the expression building on his face quite unusual for a Satanist. He looked scared.
"Who are the pupils of pain?"
he asked, examining the list again. "Well, I assume I'm one of them," I said, "but it's also after my editor, Roz. Luckily, she still has dignity and a moral compass."
"You do realize blank page of unknown suffering refers to your own soul?"
"Really? I presume that was already taken." He looked at me, his expression grave.
"This is referring to a plane of suffering beyond hell."
"Beyond hell?" I repeated. "What on earth would suffering be like beyond hell?" The lounge door burst open, swinging back hard against the kitchen wall. Fortunately, I'd attached stoppers when I'd moved in. In the room beyond us, motionless upon my writing desk, sat the typewriter. Glaring. The Satanist dropped the sheet of paper.
"It's been eavesdropping," he said.
"Yeah, it channels the subconscious, I'm afraid," I said, "which does erode privacy. It also goes crackly like a sparkler and shoots barbed hooks through my nipple teats."
"That's a thing of evil,"
he yelled out suddenly.
"An evil beyond Lucifer! An evil beyond hell!"
With that, he fled from my kitchen and hurled himself through the front door, satanic robe flapping wildly as he ran off down the stairwell. I saw he'd done one on my tiles. As I made a pretense of reaching for the Ajax and some J-cloths, I heard the words I'd been dreading deep inside my head.
Oh dear.
"Morning," I said, and began whistling.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
I sprinkled some Ajax on the offending tile. "What's wrong? Out of ribbon again?"
Turn around.
"Beg your pardon?" I said, commencing to scrub at the tile. Never had cleaning a soiled stain seemed more alluring.
I said turn around. Now.
I realised there was no way of avoiding it. No way at all. I turned around.
Punishment time.
And what really had I expected? I'd failed to bring it Roz, so now I'd have to pay.
To write you'll have to pay.
"I'm sorry for ruining your ritual," I said desperately.
I'm sorry for ruining your asshole.
And with that, punishment commenced. Hooks and chains sprang out at me, drawing my bodily flesh and taut sinews apart, flinging me once again into that cursed machinery, mincing my organic parts into stew like the macerator toilet in my previous house, which needed regular servicing despite the claim, so I would personally avoid them. Desperately, I fought to grasp onto what was left of my disintegrating particulars, as that damned typewriter flung more barbed hooks at me, spearing my nipples through and through, dragging me into it again and again, sucking my brain towards its whirring rubber platen. And I began to laugh, to scream, to explode in a heady ecstasy of exquisite psychic agony, as I dashed my mind and physical bits hither and thither against those hellish keys, and yes, I began to sing the song of myself, the melancholy yet anthemically catchy song of mankind's eternal cosmic agony. And as I sang, I was joined by Tanita Tikaram for the chorus sections, and the heavens thundered above me and within me, and the typewriter began to fizz and crackle, and then I was inside the machine itself, and outside it too, body parts drained of my essence as my soul poured like melting butter once more into its internal rotor system. Tanita had left by this stage, with my brains mashed to pulp as the rubber platen ground me up, and I beheld a host of strange planets spinning on their axes inside what was left of my head, and found myself cast upon a mighty wind blasting from an arse I could no longer feel. And at last, I rode the typewriter. Yes, I rode the typewriter, and I rode it hard, tapping and hammering and telling my tale as I raced through the cosmos, then fell from the heavens like a broken marionette, yet still muscular, to emerge from the hell of my own head, feeling again the limbs and appendages I feared had been lost for all eternity, or at least mangled beyond practical use. I sensed familiar ground below, and slowly, gently, willing my eyes to adjust themselves to the surrounding darkness, Opened them at last to find the ancient typewriter in pieces all around me, smashed into a million shards, with slips and strips of A4 floating about me like paper rain, lit up by slanting shards of thin blue light that speared the shadows through unseen walls. And then I heard a deep, sinister chuckling, and knew that some keeper of the chaos, some great swirler of confusion, was close by. Realized in one split second of mental clarity that whatever had been trapped inside that haunted machine, biding its time throughout the centuries, had at last been freed by me, unleashed to assume its proper physical form. And it spake.
I will tear your books apart.
Chapter 6. I lay disorientated in the darkness. How long had I been out of it? Hours? Minutes? Days? Weeks? Months? Years? Decades? Centuries? Millennia? Decamillenniums? Mega-annums? 10 mega-annums? Possibly deca-mega-annum or mega-mega-annum? Hell, maybe it was even tempus immemorial, i.e. Latin for always or beyond the scope of time. Trying not to panic, I checked my watch. Just over 2 hours, though I daren't breathe a sigh of relief just yet. While a watch could tell me when I was, it couldn't tell me where I was. I looked around, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. Slowly, I made out what looked like a closed door ahead of me. There was a written sign upon it, although I couldn't make out what it said from here. I walked over, but the lettering remained blurred, as if buried under a bank of fog. Giving up, I passed through it into another darkened room, identical to the one I'd just left. Another door stood opposite me, sporting another indecipherable sign. I couldn't make out what this word was either. It looked like lettering, but the word remained hazy as I approached, despite my proximity. I clutched the handle and moved through into another room, dark and featureless as before. There was another closed door opposite, and hung upon this one, yet another familiar-looking sign. But this time, the lettering was clear as day, and I was finally able to make out the word I'd been missing. Perception. So, I was moving through Huxley's infamous doors, was I? Maybe he'd owned the typewriter before me. Maybe I'd meet even him somewhere nearby. Footnote, I didn't. Steeling myself against whatever lay beyond, I opened the third door and found myself in a room that looked uncannily like the entrance lobby of Clackett Publishing. It even contained the same red bubble sofa and courtesy table, upon which had been arranged an identical treasure chest of stale celebrations and an urn of tepid water flavoured with sliced cucumber. Yet something was very different. Adorning each wall were numerous enlarged prints of my official author's publicity photograph. That might sound impressive to you, but you'd be wrong, because all of these pictures were defaced in various ways. Several bore comedy moustaches, a few others had elaborate punk mohawks, but the majority depicted massive erect penises rising from my forehead, alongside bold speech-bubbled obscenities ridiculing my writing. I looked away, transferring my irate gaze to a large desk, behind which perched a 20-something female redhead with confrontational glasses and tardy attitude to match. The sign in front of her said, Perceptionist. I strode up to her. Where am I, missy? The prolix, she replied, failing to look up. What's the prolix? She smiled to herself, then pointed to the area behind me with her pen. Take a seat, please. Typeface will see you shortly. Typeface? Who's Typeface? But take a seat, please, Typeface will see you shortly, was all I could get from her. Tutting loudly, I crossed over to the bubble sofa, hoping against hope I might retain some semblance of feeling in my blasted derriere, fearing deep down that hope might be all I had left. I sat down gently and felt nothing. Forcing back tears, I glanced over at the perceptionist, who was now busy scrawling obscene doodles on a pile of my promotional 8x12s. What are you doing? I asked, even though I could see perfectly well. Defacing you? I see. 2 minutes later I'd thought of a pithy retort, but was cut short by the telephone ringing on her desk.
Hey friend, you've been listening for a bit now? Let's take a tiny break. Here's some music to unwind. This is a free audiobook experience, and we're glad you're here.
As she reached over and picked it up, I turned my attention to the coffee table in front of me and picked up a copy of Clackett's latest catalogue. The cover showed a picture of my face with the word Nobber stamped across my forehead in Baskerville font, my least favourite. What was going on here? Evidently, in this nightmarish parallel world in which I now found myself, I was not considered the innovative literary genius my own reality recognised. I opened up the catalogue and something slimy and blue flopped off the page into my lap. It looked like an emaciated eel. What in hell? I barked, struggling as it wriggled violently about in my lap.
Ah, you found a tome worm,
said the perceptionist, momentarily lowering the phone from her ear. What's a tome worm? I shouted as the thing squirmed past my nether regions and up onto my stomach.
It's spelled W-Y-R-R-M. It's a primeval bookworm, she said, covering the receiver with one hand. Though they do look a bit like eels, except they're deadly. That one's after your brain.
I tried to bat the thing aside, shuddering as the dark blue gelatinous grub stuck fast to my hand. I flicked my wrist in vain, flapped and flailed in futile attempts to dash the mucoid succubus against a nearby wall. Yet the greased, inky-hued worm merely sucked itself closer, slithering further up my arm towards my shoulder. My neck, I thought in sudden panic. It's almost at my neck. Then it'll get my head. Then my brain.
Of course, I'll let him know,
the perceptionist said into her receiver, then hung up. She finally glanced over in my direction.
Typeface Lord of the Prolix will see you now.
She flipped a switch on her desk and the bubble sofa sprung backwards violently, propelling both me and the hideous tome worm down through parting floorboards, hurtling us into an endless cylindrical shaft extending vertically downwards beneath the Earth's crust. Although I hesitate to call it the Earth's crust, as technically it wasn't Earth-based, which I will reveal imminently. I fell. Oh, how far I fell. Far, far into the very depths of hell. Again, not technically official hell, despite my use of the word very. See above parenthesis note and pay close attention because I won't be explaining things a third time. And with me fell that monstrous cartridge-coloured parasite. For 40 minutes and 40 seconds we fell and fought and fought and fell and fought and rinse and repeat et cet ad infinitum diabolicatum. And when at that point, both exhausted from the fray, we paused for a much-needed comfort break, we fell yet further still, but I was at least able to examine my immediate surroundings and get my bearings. Despite the speed at which I passed them by, I saw that the walls of the shaft were formed from densely piled wads of dried papier-mâché. I caught an occasional glimpse of random letters, scattered words and phrases and assorted mystical runes, many of which looked vaguely familiar. I began to suspect that this tattered wall of rushing prose, part resembling the interior lining of a gigantic wasp's nest, might well be constructed from torn-up strips of my very own rejected manuscripts. Footnote: it isn't a wasp's nest, but if you are interested in wasp horror, may I recommend Sting Pregnators, my cosmic parasitic space wasp quintology. Before I had a chance to panic at the horrendous implication that my sacred words were now nothing more than pulp passing before my very eyes, the hideous worm reappeared, having decided he no longer needed number 2, and thus we resumed our titanic battle. Yet now I saw that the beast had neglected to remove a small pair of miniature glasses it presumably applied for bouts of gentle toilet reading, and gasped in abject horror. Those were my brown shades it was wearing, precise copies of them. the thing was taunting me. As it launched itself at me again and attempted to slide up my right nostril, I screamed wildly, flipping myself backwards while kicking out with the tack toe of my Texan boot, which I never take off even when intimate. The sharp, metallic tip pierced its flesh, sinking my foot half in before the sheer force of the blow catapulted the worm's grotesque body against the passing shaft wall. I continued to plunge downwards, eventually crashing arse first, not that I felt anything, into a giant stack of shredded paper, which finally broke my fall. I barely had time to gather my wits before realizing I was still sinking downwards, slowly submerging into a tangled nest of scattered A4. It felt damp below as my toes and ankles brushed against soft tissue, and I realized my body was caught in some sort of current, a flowing underground river of torn, mulched prose. I clutched at the ragged strips around me, dangling a handful in front of my eyes to peruse their content. From the immediate element of profundity evident in the words and phrases I beheld, I quickly recognized that my greatest fear had indeed been realized. This ocean of forlorn, abandoned work was my own. Sensing I might soon be drowning in the foul waters passing below me, I flailed wildly among the drifting detritus, shedding tears at the words I'd once held so dear, now floating in ruin about me. I fought against the relentless flow, lunging myself forwards through the massed mulch, grabbing for what looked like a rock jutting outwards from the nearby bank. With luck and both hands I grasped it, dragging myself upwards onto the rocky verge. I caught my breath, smoothed sodden strips of lost words from my drenched limbs, and glanced behind me. The river of mind waste flowed away into the distance, plunging at length into a tunnel of blackened rock, journeying unseen beyond the cavern wall towards some distant, unknown region. I'd been deposited in what appeared to be a vast subterranean chamber. Far above, thin luminescent shafts of bright blue light shone from slatted openings in what might have once formed the walls of an ancient prehistoric temple. But on closer inspection, I perceived large patches of organic material, slowly throbbing and oozing at intervals through the surface of the rock. These areas of pale, blood-veined matter resembled, to my eyes, the spongy, tissued lining of some colossal human brain. Was that where I was? Drifting on a pile of my life's shredded prose within a vast psychogeographical manifestation of my internal mind?
Yes,
said a familiar voice. I flinched, terrified. I'd heard the word all right, but not aloud. I'd heard it from deep inside my own brain, which in this place was technically the same thing.
exactly. This is your brain, the hell of your own head. Your hell head. Ha 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 ha.
I thought it was called the Prolix, I yelled back.
It is called the Prolix too. All things in the realm of the Prolix have too many words, names, appellations, monikers, and signifiers. See? Understand? Comprehend? Are able to process?
Show yourself, I demanded. Instantly the shafts of light above were extinguished, and I was cast once more into total darkness. I realized then the true horror of my situation. Not only had highest heaven and deepest hell both rejected me, but now my own head was subjecting me to eternal torments of the soul.
Precisely. Exactly. An accurate appraisal of the situation, predicament, quandary, or pickle.
So this was a realm of suffering beyond hell, a realm beyond the beyond.
Or the Beyonder. That's another name we use. Employ, implement.
I said show yourself, I cried again. Show me who you are. I peered into the shadows. At length, I glimpsed a shape moving towards me from the darkness. It was no longer pitch black, by the way, as the slatted windows in the walls above had opened up again, illuminating the area with rays of otherworldly light. I later discovered these were dimmable, hence me not immediately noticing. The thing from the darkness slowly emerged, silhouetted against the shadows. It was tall and thin, sporting a long leather trench coat, of which I approved, covered with open sores, which I was less keen on. Lost souls dangled from both pockets, and the thing's face I saw once I'd put on my driving shades was spiked all over like hedgehog skin. Pins. Pins. Oh God, the pins. The damned pins. Except these weren't pins. Not even close to being pins. Oh, that they were pins, but they weren't. Not pins at all. Oh no. These pins all ended in type bars. A typewriter's type bars. The face, skewered with typewriter's type bars, opened its mouth, not easy under the circumstances, and rows of rusting metallic teeth commenced to clatter like the hellish hammering of 1,000 typewriter keys. Then it spake.
I am Typeface, Lord of the Prolix, and I have torn your books apart.
Chapter 7. Why have you torn my books apart?
So that you may suffer as your readers suffer, from a surfeit, a glut, an over-excessive litany of prose, words, language, narrative.
Are you my typewriter?
Yes, in its ultimate form. I am Typeface, Lord of the Prolix, and you, Nick Steen, are my...
It raised its arm towards me, pointing an elongated finger.
bitch.
I know that already. So this was what I'd been sleeping with. This thing. This monster. This grotesque parody of the human form. This hideous human typewriter hybrid is what had been having its wicked way with me for the past 12 months. A living keyboard possessed by some cosmic demon from another dimension. But why?
Behold, look, see.
Typeface swept his extended arm sideways, and as he did so, the black cavern walls behind crumpled and rolled back like scrolling parchment to reveal, beyond us, a terrifying vista. Another world. An alien realm.
This is the Prolix, a realm of total and ultimate chaos, of suffering beyond the beyond, a place without meaning, a place of death.
I stared out into hell, again not technically biblical hell, my eyes barely able to take in the myriad horrors afore me. Everywhere I looked there were strips of torn paper, abandoned children's letterblocks lying higgledy-piggledy, roads and paths leading nowhere, and more often than not ending in unexpected cul-de-sacs. Signs pointed upwards when they should be pointing downwards. Arms indicated left when they should be indicating right. This was a world where in was out and out was in. Dictionary factories spewed wrongly spelled words into the air to form new meaningless words, which floated directionless into the ether, losing themselves in the never-ending chaos. And all the while, a chorus of tuneless jazz saxophones blew discordant, cacophonous physical notation towards my extremities. The result was an unholy, meaningless din.
You have failed us, Nick Steen.
Failed? I cried, sick to my stomach. This place is total chaos. There's no way a writer like myself could ever concentrate in an environment like this. Writing and reading would be a complete nightmare. I want nothing to do with it.
Ah, but look, yea, but observe, nay, pay close attention, but soft attend.
As Typeface spoke, a shadow fell across the land, and I craned my neck upwards, seeking its source. There, towering above everything like a sick parody of my novel Diabolos Apocalypsicum Penetratio, loomed a vast mountain of ever-accumulating paper. A colossal and endless work in progress. An ever-growing proto-novel branching upwards through the black thunderous clouds gathering overhead.
Behold the endless book, the unfinished tome, the opus without end. It was intended for your world, Nick Steen. Behold, our child.
So that's what we'd been doing. Suddenly it all began to make sense. Those thrashing acts of vile procreation had been an attempt to conceive the ultimate book. Evidently, Typeface had been using me, body and mind, as an unwitting conduit in order to invade and take over the world. using me to produce, via demeaning acts of bodily subjugation, colossal works of total nonsense that would eventually destroy the planet's natural resources, confuse humanity, and allow Typeface to spread the realm of the Prolix into our own, like some form of vile cosmic disease. What an arsehole! As I watched, sheets of paper blew hither and thither, floating upwards through the air into the dark heavens, to land, I assumed, atop the book that would never end.
Now that you have disobeyed me, Nixteen, spurned me, opposed my will, I have brought you here to the Prolix to await your doom, your suffering, your true punishment. Like Sisyphus, you shall remain here in the Prolix for all eternity, your endless task never done.
Sisyphus is here too, is he?
Figuratively speaking, metaphorically so, not literally.
I had to get out of here somehow. But that somehow was a big somehow, given I was in a parallel dimension formed partly from the inner workings and trappings of my own mind. And given that I was incarcerated here with a foul being from some race of dark cosmic gods hailing from another dimension, poised to infiltrate our reality, it didn't look like it was going to be easy.
And now...
He waved his hand the other way, and the cavern wall scrolled back to black, obliterating my vision of the Prolix.
The suffering!
Before we get started, I said, affecting an air of nonchalance, can we dispense with the excess words, because I do get the point?
Fine. Okay. Sure.
I said...
Joking.
Fine.
Mocking. Ribbing.
Will you stop that?
Ha ha ha.
Will you stop?
He he he.
Christ alive.
Ho ho.
I waited.
Ho.
I continued to wait, prepared to string out my silence all night if I had to. After 4 hours, Typeface spoke again.
Fine. Go ahead.
What do you...
Proceed.
Forget it. What was the bloody point?
Enough time wasting. Prepare for some real punishment.
Typeface held up his bony hand. From the sleeve of the long leather coat emerged a cloud of minuscule black forms, like tiny midges. Only these were a mixture of distorted shapes. Small squiggled lines like stray falling hairs, jagged dots of black like burned oven scrapings, all swarming and darting about the air in my line of vision, everywhere and anywhere I cared or dared to stare. Jesus H., I said, realizing what was now materializing before my very eyes. A writer's worst fear. Floaters. Before I knew where to run, they were upon me, flashing and darting over the surface of my eyes like a swarm of flying insects. Desperately, ultimately in vain, I attempted to fight them off, knowing that they were indeed not only a writer's worst enemy, able to distort and distract one's train of thought from the unsullied whiteness of the blank page, but a reader's too, whose mental suffering at this relentless, annoying squiggling might spell the end of their reading habit forever, thus condemning my, and potentially other authors', work to the charity shop shelf, where it would ultimately fail to earn additional royalties. "Get them off me!" I screamed. "They burn! They bite!" They actually did neither, but I was getting frustrated. Yet Typeface merely laughed at my suffering, his teeth continuing to chatter as the dreaded floaters filled my irises, swarming in and around me like a plague of locusts, breaking my concentration and irritating my vision. Footnote, and I've written 19 locust novels, so this is no idle comparison. "Enough!" I cried, crying tears in an effort to rid myself of these bloody floaters. "Enough, damn you! I've suffered enough!"
No, Nixteen, you have not suffered enough. Not nearly enough. Not nearly enough by half.
Look, I know you had plans for me. I know you were using me as a means to invade our universe, but I won't let you destroy me here either, Typeface. Whatever you do to me, I'll resist, and I'll survive. I'll escape the Prolix, and then I'll come back to get you in particular. I'm your bitch no more.
Apologies, I wasn't listening.
Like I said, an arsehole.
Now, let the real suffering commence.
All at once I heard music again. No longer jazz saxophone, but instead the brash, swaggering brass trumpery of a late-night Soho sleaze band.
Step forth, Soul Stripper!
I looked up, trying to sneak a peek of what was now approaching slowly from the darkest corner of the cavern. But what eventually appeared was no footlit, suspender-strung nymphette of the scantily clad variety. It lacked breasts and buttocks and sported knives for hands. Long, black, rusting blades of the catering school variety. Grim realization slowly dawned. I'd seen those blades before. They were the ones I'd used to shred that old writer's manuscript in front of his very eyes. The man whose face I'd subsequently recognized in Moses Unique, that strange rubber-aproned owner of Uniquity's Ink plus Eels. I recalled how gleefully I'd gripped those black steel blades, a childhood keepsake or so he'd screamed, in both hands to slash the pages from his life's work with impunity and without mercy, howling in raucous, victorious laughter as he struggled to squeeze himself free. What approached me now then was evidently some form of unjust punishment for my supposed crime. For the dreaded Soul Stripper, arch ripper of the prolix, was about to tear me a new one. I tried to turn, hoping I might dive back into the river of pulped prose, but instead felt myself yanked backwards in sudden pain onto a waiting surgeon's trolley. Before I knew what was happening, I was lying prostrate upon the metallic bed, shrieking in pain as a second volley of chained hooks shot from the darkness and speared me in my front side, jerking me forwards violently, forcing my helpless body upwards into a sitting position. I screamed again as the chains dashed me brutally back and forth, sitting me up, then slamming me down as the Soul Stripper approached, whirling those immense rusting blades of blackened steel.
Now strip his soul!
And lo, I was stripped. Fright break. The following passage has been flagged on grounds of good taste by the publisher. For those of a stronger disposition who aren't human cowards, continue listening. For those of you who are craven cowards, skip to the next track now. For avoidance of any doubt, neither the author nor the publisher will be held responsible for any offence or psychological injuries sustained by listening to the material which follows. You have been warned. Welcome, friend. You have chosen unwisely to continue listening. So, dim the lights, grab a tissue if you need one, though I'd urge those types not to attend any signings, and enjoy this flagged but not censored passage of pure, unadulterated body horror. They began with my back, tearing a large layer of skin and flesh, approximately 19 inches neck to haunch by 23, shoulder to shoulder, down to my buttocks. I yelled aloud as the cold air brushed my exposed musculature, bracing myself for the assault on my nether regions. Luckily, I still had no feeling in my buttocks, so excruciating pain there was happily averted. But within seconds, the Soul Stripper had moved on to the rear of both thighs. It stripped the skin of each down to my heels, making 2 small incisions around each knee to free the front sides as well, allowing both haunches to be yanked downwards under the knees and slid free over each foot like flesh socks. In my delirium, I wondered if they might sell them back to me at a later date so I could keep out the cold, but these monsters were beyond such niceties. Reeling from the removal of my entire back section, I grimaced as yet more hooks flew downwards from the blackness above, impaling me anew, and immediately I was dragged upwards to be speared afresh from below by still more hooks shooting from the floor. Suspended between unseen firmaments above and below me, I hung between infinities, half man, half flesh skeleton, as the stripper went to work on my front side. I cried aloud in outraged fury as my front thighs were dragged upwards, curling over like scooped ice cream. The Soul Stripper severed them with 2 swift slices of his knife and flung them backwards over his shoulder, where the cloud of waiting floaters descended upon them and gorged. I stared in horror as those greedy mites consumed in their entirety my carved-up flanks, then glanced below me in horror as the Soul Stripper lifted up my manhood delicately between 2 blades and gently clipped it free. I wasn't sure what to expect beneath my natural sheathing system, and was astonished to discover what looked like the neckline of a small diplodocus. Despite my screams and Typeface's assurance that this was a frightening medical anomaly even he could not explain, I was thankfully unable to dwell too long on my misfortune, as the soul stripper had by now moved onto my chest. This was removed far more quickly than I'd been expecting, and I guess I was too distracted by the sight of my own heart beating upwards against the stretched wall of my chest muscles as blood pumped visibly through my system via a network of exposed veins and arteries to object. The skin from both arms came off much like that on my legs, but this time the soul stripper did offer to sell it back to me as gloves. By now, I was too delirious to reply, all the while dreading the ultimate indignity, where the skin of my head would be sliced free and removed, exposing the bald pate of boned skull. No longer would I feel my glorious mane above me. No longer would my hair invigorate, strengthen and testosteronize me. The soul stripper went to work on my cranium, forcing both knife blades up my nostrils, slitting sideways to sever my nasal walls and provide the necessary purchase for his fingers. He reached in with both thumbs and peeled my face apart, stripping a long vertical line upwards to my forehead and down towards my chin, parting me like a ripe outspan. When he'd finished loosening each cheek from the attendant bone plate, he pulled my head upwards by the hair and tugged me hard. One yank and my scalp slid free from its skull like the top half of an overfilled refuse sack, sending my naked pate crashing back against the hard surface of the surgeon's table, cracking it in twain. Relax. Is everyone all right? I hope not. Unpleasant dreams. Now continue with the story. Having flayed me, the soul stripper tossed my spent face wrapper to the slavering floaters, walked over to a nearby cupboard that had just appeared, and took out a giant salt shaker. Before I could formally object, the soul stripper tipped the shaker upside down and commenced pouring salt on my wounds, both literally and figuratively, i.e. doubly bad. The pain was beyond description, therefore won't be described.
Well flayed,
said Typeface, as the soul stripper finished pouring the salt and began to rub it into my exposed flesh with both hands, which were still carving knives, remember. I just couldn't believe it. This was heaping indignity upon indignity, pouring further salt on my wounds by first pouring salt on my wounds, then rubbing additional salt on said wounds. I was livid. "Okay, you've flayed me," I said. "Big deal. What else you got?" Typeface walked over to me and leaned down to leer and hiss in my ear. He was so close to me that I could have reached out to strike one of the type bars on his damn face if I wanted to. But I was beginning to feel like I'd had enough of writing, if I'm honest. Had enough of everything. But Typeface hadn't. That was all too apparent by the way he leered at me and laughed and looked like he was gearing up for something else entirely. No way had he had enough.
"Now,"
he said, the type bars on his face hammering away furiously with each word he spoke.
"Remainder him."
Chapter 8. They flipped me over onto my front. I realised I was dripping body juice all over the floor, but they didn't seem to care about the mess I was making, although I'd have been absolutely livid if it was my flat. I'd gone mad enough about that lone crack in my kitchen tiles after all. I guess I was delirious, but I was inside my own mind, and it was sure as hell working in mysterious ways. I forced what was left of my neck upwards and glimpsed another figure emerging from the shadows. It was a tiny woman in a tweed suit resembling a mousy-looking librarian I'd once berated for failing to enforce overdue fines on my books, thereby reducing my personal PLR income over a 10-year period by £9.17. She dangled a black marker pen in her right hand, and as she drew close to me, held it out against my benumbed derriere and drew a thick black line across my skinless buttocks. I felt that all right. But the old hag wasn't finished. Additional fright break. Yet again, the following passage has been flagged on grounds of good taste by the publisher. For those of a mature disposition who aren't abject failures of human beings, all you need to do is continue listening. For those of you who still require reins to engage in what I deem to be your pathetic excuse for an existence, skip to the next track now. For avoidance of doubt, neither the author nor the publisher will be held responsible for any offence or devastating psychological injuries sustained by listening to what follows. You have again been warned. Welcome, friend, to a second helping of socially unacceptable, visceral body horror that you'd most likely be prevented from selling in physical form on eBay. While the soul stripper grabbed my right arm and held it down against the arm of the trolley, the old woman drew out an industrial hole punch, clamped a handful of my jellied shoulder sinew between her fingernails, and forced it underneath the circular plunger blade. I screamed anew as she leapt up and slammed her ass down hard against the handle, sending the bolt piercing through my gathered flesh. I saw a rush of stars, and when said stars finally faded, felt even more excruciating pain. I turned my head to examine my latest wound. No sooner had the old woman removed the hole punch from me than a fresh cloud of swarming floaters commenced to infest the crater she'd just drilled. Before I could howl in protest, she'd moved onto my left side and was busy carving off a scalloped corner from my shoulder bone, admittedly a less well-known signifier of a remaindered item, but one still in occasional use among cheaper mass-market paperback publishers of predominantly pulp-based material. Well done, traveller. You've braved the worst. Or have you? Now continue listening. Next track. Do your worst, you old bag. You won't break me.
Yes, we will.
Like hell, I screamed. I'm all that stands between you and a demonic invasion of our mortal realm by cosmic beings from another plane of reality, and there's no way I'll let being completely flayed from top to toe and cruelly remaindered prevent me fighting off a legion of black angels hell-bent on vanquishing the existence of mankind.
Sorry, we weren't listening to you.
He would in time. Though I'd been flayed, balded, and unshouldered in this parallel dimension of eternal physical and psychological torture, I began to wonder what else Typeface could possibly do to me that would make my situation any worse.
This.
Yet another hell priest of bodily horror emerged from the shadows, scuttling toward me like a giant spider. I saw it had two gigantic thumbs, which rubbed together periodically like feelers. The thing was a grotesque parody of the human hand, haired and greasy. A hand so large and distorted it could only have belonged to a particularly low-grade type of worker, perhaps a door-to-door tradesman or overweight trucker. The creature moved upon what looked to me like a spread of fat, knobbled fingers. A knuckler beast, then, resembling the hand of those particular readers I loathed at book signings. The sort who would take a brand new copy of your latest book, seize it twixt both hands, then bend the pages so far backwards they practically formed a rounded cylinder which they then expected you to sign.
Behold the spine cracker.
I'm beholding him already. Rubbing its large thumbs together so hard they began to generate smoke, the hideous form reared its mighty thumbs skyward, raising itself over my prone body. Without warning, it scurried speedily onto my back. Pausing for a moment to perform its strange ritual, caressing both thumbs together like an insect preparing to mate, the creature then slammed either one hard across my opposite ends, imprisoning my feet and head as its bed of knuckles underneath locked me in place, clamping my body tight as if in an ironmonger's vice. I screamed again, quite hoarse now, as the thing proceeded to force my spine backwards, with the intention, I presumed, of making me meet myself in the middle. To crack said spine, in other words.
Exactly, precisely, you got it.
I felt it going, sensed the balls of my feet approaching the back of my head, felt the calloused skin of the creature's thumbs against the front of what used to be my forehead as it bent me round and into myself, forcing the bones outwards towards breaking point. I could almost hear the mighty split approaching, a slow but steady cracking of my spinal shaft, like the settling of a rented wooden log house in a summer heatwave, with all the attendant sanitary issues. I heard the steaming hiss of bubbling spinal fluid, threatening to erupt into a terrible, life-draining geyser of my third and final fright break. The next two words have been flagged by the publisher on grounds of good taste, and reinstated here at the author's, i.e. my, insistence. Skip to the next track if you really want to hopelessly mar your comprehension of the rest of the text. Previous warnings apply. Threatening to erupt into a terrible, life-draining geyser of my own effluence. Now continue. I didn't care anymore. I felt myself slipping into painless, although still hugely painful, to be honest, oblivion, as my numbed, mangled frame gave way to the natural process of death. Even though this particular death was anything but natural. I was currently bent backwards between two giant disembodied thumbs, remember. Was I dead or only dreaming now? For I thought I could sense via what used to be my nose the sweet scent of summer flowers. Then a strange calmness swam over me. Was I now so divorced from my mangled nerves that complete detachment from insufferable agonies had finally been granted by whatever power ruled this realm of complete and total pain? Was that sweet smell I sensed the mystical scentage of my own spurting spinal fluid, that blessed internal tincture wrought by merciful nature to spirit its owner loftily oblivionwards on soft clouds of numbing back vapour during one's final seconds? Or was it but the calming breeze from yonder sward, seeking a route through the darkness twixt life and death, in an effort most nobleth to comfort this poor nay-faring wayfarer? Or was it Shalimar by Guerlain? I sniffed hard, struggling to draw something in via the twin sunken craters of my mashed nasal cartilage. Yes, it was definitely Shalimar by Guerlain. Mustering what little strength remained in my flayed and salted body, I forced my eyes open, which actually wasn't hard as my lids had completely gone and they were permanently open anyway, and I saw, like a miracle before me, the silhouette of a delectable female form I knew all too well. For